Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the podcast. I love all of the DMs and the calls and the emails, and I realize that we've formed somewhat of a community, and that excites me, and I want to get to know you all a little bit better if you're interested. So I've created something called the Owners Forum. We will meet once a month for 90 minutes and talk about challenges you're having at your properties. We can talk about trends. I'll give you my input, things that are going on down here in South Florida or what I'm seeing around the country. You'll have other people in the group around the country sharing what's going on in their strip center world. And we'll do it for about 6 months and we'll see how it is. I did something like this during COVID. It was very needed, very much needed, and really productive. So if you're interested, we'll put the details in the links below. And our first call is in July. So join the group if you're interested, and I'll see you on the first call. Hi, this is Beth Azor, and this is my podcast, I Own a Shopping Center, Now What? So this week, I had someone reach out to me with a challenge, and I was able to collect some information from them and get on a phone call with them, send them some emails, got on a phone call with them, and helped try to give them some tips and advice to solve their problem. The first thing that I want to address, which came up in this conversation, is exclusives. So exclusives in shopping centers are very, very, very common, and there can be many of them. If you have a Walmart as a shadow anchor, you may buy a little strip center next to a huge Walmart and you don't even own the Walmart, but your strip center has to abide by the exclusives of the Walmart. That is very, very common, and Walmart could have a ton of exclusives that you wouldn't even think about. But for example, I've got two 42,000-ish square foot shopping centers, and the amount of exclusives that my predecessors gave to tenants are vast, and that's very common. There is a big push to try to get rid of exclusives in shopping centers going forward, but it's super hard because everyone else gives them. So when a tenant that you want to sign a lease with comes to you and says, well, everyone else is going to give me an exclusive, the only way I'm going to come here is if you give me an exclusive, then you're going to end up like me and give exclusives even though you don't want to. I mean, and when I was having this conversation with my new friend, I shared with them that I have a 1,650 square foot second gen restaurant space that I need to lease. And in the shopping plaza, which is only 42,000 square feet, I literally have an Asian exclusive, so Japanese, not Chinese, but it says Asian. So I would probably have to go to them if I wanted to put in a Chinese restaurant to see if I could get a waiver. I've got a chicken exclusive. I've got smoothies and acai bowl exclusive. I have a bubble tea exclusive. I have a coffee and donut exclusive. I have deli exclusive. I have a pizza and Italian restaurant exclusive. But you get that point. So in this new space, the tenant that moved out of the space that I have now vacant was mac and cheese, very unique use. So I've identified 3 prospective, I also have a Middle Eastern exclusive. So I've identified 3 uses I can do. I can do hamburgers, I can do vegan, and I can do Latin, but the Latin can't have a large amount of chicken. So what do? Do I throw up my hands and say, oh my gosh, I have so many exclusives? Of course not. I focus on, talking to the 50 burger restaurants in South Florida, and I talk to as many Latin restaurants as I can. The problem with the Latin is everyone wants, Latin restaurants usually have a large amount of chicken. Currently, I'm working with a Colombian restaurant, and they've agreed that they would limit their chicken dishes to 3. But my point with this gentleman who called and said, you're not going to believe all the exclusives I have, and that's why it's been hard for my leasing agent to not lease the vacancy for years. I did not find the exclusives to be onerous whatsoever. I found them to be very commonplace. So that was lesson number one. The next thing that I shared with him and I want to share with you is always determine what is the downside if you break the exclusive, right? So if, let's say, Walgreens has an exclusive on pharmacy and you have someone that wants to come in and do a pharmacy, which probably wouldn't happen. So let me change that scenario. Let's say Walgreens has an exclusive on giving vaccinations and you have an urgent care that wants to come in and do an urgent care, but they also give vaccinations. And you're like, oh gosh, I'm going to lose a 5,000 square foot urgent care, when we all know that Walgreens is probably, has a very short shelf life here. It might be meaning that they're closing hundreds and hundreds of stores. And is Walgreens going to be in that shopping center 5 years from now? I don't know. So if the remedy, let's say Walgreens is paying $12, and the remedy, if you break the exclusive, is that the rent goes to 50%. And many times what the remedy for the landlord breaking the exclusives or the penalty is that rent drops. What I always say when I'm negotiating this is I'll agree to a penalty if your sales drop, right? If I put in someone to go against your exclusive and your sales don't drop, then you don't get to go to penalty. Now, I'm not going around breaking exclusives at all. That's not the spirit of the agreement, but I'm just saying in a situation where it's very difficult to lease and you've got a bunch of vacancies, you may have to take a look at what is the penalty. So in this case, let's say they have an urgent care. Walgreens has an exclusive on vaccinations. You can't get Walgreens' attention to see if you could get a waiver on the vaccinations. And the penalty is that the rent drops to half, and in a year, the tenant, usually this is what I put in my negotiations, that the rent drops for a year, and then if the tenant has to shit or get off the pot, excuse my French. Basically, they have to decide if they want to go forward or they can terminate their lease. But they can't just have half rent for the rest of the life of their lease. So in this case, with this friend of mine, I absolutely would be probably a proponent of thinking, let me go do this urgent care. Let's see if Walgreens even notices and defaults me on the vaccine issue. I certainly can go and ask Walgreens for a waiver also. And then knowing full well that my rent might drop, but in the meantime, I might be bringing in a new tenant on a space that's been vacant for years at $20 a square foot. So if you run the math, and we all know that Walgreens doesn't look like it's got a long future ahead, that would be a bet I might be willing to take. So certainly you can ask for a waiver. The problem sometimes with waivers is the tenants want something in return. And again, this is an economic business decision you want to make. Maybe Walgreens says, I'll give you the waiver, but I want to take my rent from $12 to $10. Well, that would be probably a good idea or a good exchange if you can get an urgent care to come in and pay you $20, right? So for sure, try always to get the waiver, then look at what the penalty is and make a business call if that's something that you want to do. And then lastly, having some creativity. So in this instance, this friend of mine is actually a retailer, and they had maybe, let's say, 30,000 square feet, and they were interested in reducing their size to 10 to 12,000 square feet and then leasing out the remaining piece. In the site plan that they showed me, let's say they had a rectangle, they showed me a split right down the middle. So one of the things I said to them was their use was a destination use. So because of that, I said, you could actually L-shape, you could reduce your frontage instead of having it be half, let's say, 80 feet of frontage for you and 80 feet of frontage for your new neighbor. You could go down to 40 and L-shape the back so that you maintain the bad space, right? The space that a new tenant might not want to take. And then, so you L-shape your business, you take your 40 feet of frontage, and now the new vacancy has that original 80 plus 40, 120. And maybe what you can do is split that into two, with two users having 60 feet of frontage, because the depth is probably 80 to 100, so you don't want to divide it to much less than that. But now your leasing agent has an option to show prospects the larger space with the larger frontage, or two spaces with lower frontage but lower total square footage overall. I hope I explained that and you guys were following that. The situation here is you want to give your leasing agents as much options and opportunities as possible to go to a bunch of different prospects and see where the need is. In another situation with this very same site plan, it appeared to me when I first looked at the site plan that there was a back area that, like a side of the space, where I said, well, could you put a tenant like a daycare in the back? Like if they were to split it, could we find a daycare that could have a back entranceway, back drop-off area? Because the way the site plan laid out, it was near a street in the back, and I thought this could be good for a use like that. So in summary, exclusives are very common. What you need to do is and you and your leasing agents need to do, is come up with targeted uses that you are allowed to have and start a marketing campaign to those. Finding out who is in your market. So let's say you identify a shoe store that does not break any exclusives. Well, how many shoe stores do you have in your market already? And then how many are within, let's say, 100 miles? Because let's say you have a site in the Midwest and you're in Milwaukee. Well, if there are shoe stores in Chicago or Indianapolis or Detroit or Cleveland, and maybe they have 3 or 4 locations in those other Midwestern cities, your leasing agent should be reaching out to those in the nearby areas. So that was a great call that we had together, where I could share some of my experience with my 39 years. And I think he felt better about opportunities going forward and different ideas and ways to manage his third-party agents also. So if any of you have situations like this, I'm always willing to jump on a call and try to help. And then don't forget, we are creating, it looks like the owners forum, or this, the shopping center collective that we're creating. So many people are traveling this summer, so we're probably moving it to start in September. If you are interested in joining this, it's going to be about a group of about 10 of us, where we'll meet once a month, 90 minutes, to talk about things like this, where someone might have a problem, I might have a solution, some of you might have some ideas, and collectively, we will solve all of the world's problems where it comes to shopping centers, leasing, operations, management, etc. Have a great week, and we'll talk next week.